We're ready to go. Hey, folks at home, we're starting the show. This week, Axanar has a new director and a new lawsuit against his old director. There's a bloodbath at DC Comics. Fortnite is out of there at Apple and Google. And this week's segment of Lowered Expectations, we review episode 2, all tonight on the Real SuperGeeks. And welcome everyone to the show. Let's start off by with a quick introduction of my esteemed colleagues, and then we are going to jump into the multiple topics of interest we have lined up for you tonight. We're going to start with our stalwart producer, Justin Burton. Justin, where the hell are you these days?
Hey, same old place, usual. Show prep is a lot more entailed these days. So, yeah, definitely keeping me busy.
Excellent. And from Salt Lake City, Jason Kovalik. How are you, Jason?
Outstanding. It's Friday and it's my birthday weekend.
Oh, happy birthday. And from an undisclosed location in Arizona, Raul Padron.
Hello,
Raul,
everyone.
You got a haircut, finally.
I did. People were complaining that my hair was too messed up, so might as well fix that in the only way I know how.
And, well, effectively, it looks like. And also with us, of course, is the inimitable from Sin City himself, Sean P. O'Halloran. Sean, how are you? And most importantly, are you wearing pants?
No pants, and I'm all about being tactical tonight. Thank you very much.
Apparently.
Because we got a war that has started. Oh, my God.
Yes, we'll be getting into that right quick. And last but not least is our once mascot Index, but our always welcome contrarian, Sun Seal. Sun, how are you? And how's the weather in Arkansas?
Well, it was interesting for spending my birthday without a computer. So that was a thing. I got a new headset last week, and just as I get a new headset, my CPU fan died.
Ooh.
So I had to wait and order a new fan for the computer. So that was fun. But when you have a computer that's getting on to be about 15 years old, yeah, I think it's time for a new computer.
Mine is right behind you at 8, so it's about due pretty soon myself.
Yeah, so I know the feeling.
All right. I think we got everybody. Yes. So let's dive into topic number 1, and that is breaking news that Alec Peters, producer of the never to be produced, probably Axanar short films. Never to be produced is the Axanar feature film. We'll see about the short films. He last week fired or got rid of, or he resigned. We're not sure what the order was there, but Paul Jenkins is no longer the director of Axanar, and he's been replaced by someone who was also announced today. But in departing, Paul Jenkins raised concerns about the productions, whether or not the productions' transparency, accountability, and integrity met up with his own and his company Meta Studios' personal standards, and left. Peters started a week-long parade of insults and allegations aimed at Jenkins, and finally wound it up today with a filing in Forsyth County Court in Georgia, in which he's suing him, Paul Jenkins, for trade slander. So we have a copy of that legal complaint that we're going to go through a little bit to find out, how much water it holds, and whether this has a prayer of going anywhere, and if there's, what the strategy is that might be at play here. So let's start off with...
real quick, I just wanted to point out that ABS would like us to discuss this.
I'm sorry, that who?
The Nose would like to join us and discuss this. Shall we get him
on? That's up to stalwart producer Justin.
Yeah, look here, let me put the invite link into the chat, and then you can send it to him, John.
Sounds good. I'll do it right now.
Okay.
Hold on.
So he wants to go public, huh?
Looks like it.
Okay.
Oh boy. And then it's going into the Super Geeks chat.
Are you sure he wasn't talking about talking to you and I rather than publicly?
He wants to do it right now, so I'm based on that. I assume I'll send him. I'll see what happens.
Okay.
Make sure he knows we're live.
He knows we're live.
He knows what he's in the chat.
Okay. Cool. Well, we'll welcome him on. This is our one of our pals, a lawyer in California who does IP work, intellectual property work, and he's taken a look at the legal complaint that Alec Peters filed today, and we'll see what he thinks. He actually did send me some notes on it earlier, so I know a little bit about what he thinks about it, having read it.
This is like a big breaking story, you guys. So excuse us for being a little scatterbrained right now, because
Indeed, it literally this announcement came down about just a couple 4 hours ago.
Yeah, but
3 hours ago. 3 hours ago. It was at 7. It was at 7 o'clock Pacific time. So
that's usually about the time we lock down production for the show. So it's like,
so we're scrambling a little bit.
Yeah, it's okay. On the fly, always good. Bring it on.
Okay.
All right.
Just asked me if we had the link. I told him you sent it to him, Sean.
Yeah, it's in the Super Geeks chat, Sean.
Okay, so while we wait for him to come on board, let's talk a little bit about what we know of the complaint so far. It's 18 pages, and he's suing Paul Jenkins for an unspecified amount of damages, and claims that he's been hurt financially and emotionally by that statement. Yep. And I'm you should see the actual words that he used to describe it. That anguish, mental anguish was in there. And
poor baby.
Yeah. Wah.
You guys don't realize he's a gentle flower in the desert.
He is a gentle flower with Gowron eyes.
Yeah, with Gowron eyes, indeed. So basically, he's saying that, and we'll read from Paul's statement. The part of the statement that he alleges constitutes the trade slander. Starting off, first of all, with the fact it's not slander, it's libel. Slander is something spoken. Libel is something published, and this was a published statement. Therefore, it's libel, not slander. That's the first thing they teach us in journalism school, and I think that someone like Alec, who went to law school, would know the difference, but probably not.
Lawyer by training.
Lawyer by training. So as far as the statement, or not the statement, but the legal complaint itself, there's not a lot of there in 18 pages that I read. There's a lot of repetitive things about how he published it and kept publishing it, and the fact that it's still up means that he's basically saying it over and over and over again on his Facebook page, Twitter, and Meta Studios website. And let's take a look at that actual statement. He says that he alleges the Jenkins public statement includes additional false and overtly defamatory charges calculated to injure, that's literally how it reads, calculated to injure Mr. Peters in his trade or profession, including, without limitation, impugning Mr. Peters' quote, transparency, accountability, and integrity, unquote, and ability to produce a, quote, beautiful, unquote, film in his trade or profession as a film producer. So,
I'm sorry.
So let's compare that with what Paul Jenkins actually said. This is what he said in his statement on August 8th. as we covered on Axamonitor. It says Meta Studios and its employees, including founder Paul Jenkins, are no longer associated with the Star Trek fan film Axanar, led by Alec Peters. Paul's credits on the project included co-writer and director, and Meta Studios was credited as the film's co-producer. By the way, Alec Peters takes issue with all of those things, but we'll talk about that. Continuing. However, due to conflicts with Meta Studios' core values of transparency, accountability, and integrity, we have removed ourselves from the credits. Paul's rewritten Axanar script and all scenes filmed to date will not be used by the Axanar project, as these materials are protected by copyright. Paul Jenkins and Meta Studios will be removed from Axanar publications, websites, live streaming, social media, and the like, and will no longer be used to bolster the solicitation of project donations. So that is the extent of the statement that is supposedly slanderous or libelous, depending which law school you went to, apparently. Comments. Sean, I know you have a lot to say.
Well,
Nose is here.
oh, the nose is among us. Yes.
Everybody,
There he is, Andrew Blake Schmidt. Thank you very much for joining us.
no worries.
Andrew is a
Hello,
California attorney, and he does work in IP. He has some history with Axanar himself, and he's had a chance to read the legal complaint that was filed today by Alec Peters. So, and our nickname for him, of course, is the Nose, because he has a beautiful nose. I rather enjoy it. Ross may have his eyebrows. Andrew has the nose. So, Andrew, what do you want to tell us about this legal complaint?
Well, at first I thought, because I've been trying to follow this stuff a little bit, because I had seen the press release that Paul had gotten fired. And I thought to myself, all right, well, what actionable claim does each party have against each other? Just background on me. I graduated law school in 2015, took and passed the California bar, and I've been working in-house for roughly the past 4 years. I used to work for a big tobacco distributor north of Los Angeles, and now I work for a clothing company in Orange County. And we do a lot of licensed stuff, branded apparel, things like that. But the main issue here is it mainly just boils down to, even though he calls it trade slander, it's defamation. More or less what's known as an intentional tort. And it more or less goes to the notion of libel and slander are part of it. But what it comes down to is it's usually under the common law. I'll just straight up, as a disclosure, I can't give legal advice here, and I'm not a Georgia bar attorney.
We wouldn't take your advice anyway, Andrew.
I know, fair enough, but I have to say that disclaimer. So
Yes, I'm sure.
the main issue that you have is it usually boils down to, in common law and usually in state law, it's about 4 factors. It's 1, a defamatory statement of fact, 2, of and concerning the plaintiff, 3, published to a third party, and 4, damages. So I know there was kind of all of this talk about copyright and various things that would come together, but it seemed to just boil down to Axanar took offense to Jenkins' statement that he published through Meta Studios. So the way defamation works is it's those 4 factors, but usually under state law, there's a certain carve out known as defamation per se, which they just say on its face, it's defamation. So you don't have to go through the factors as much. So
That is, by the way, what Alec Peters is claiming here, that it is defamation per se.
Yeah, and it's usually more or less what it comes down to is if somebody has, this was like first year torts, so I'm trying to go back to it. And what it mainly boils down to is if somebody has, I think, an unsavory communicable disease, because I think some of the case law goes, I think, back to like, I want to say like the AIDS crisis or something like that, where they'd say, oh, this person has this contagious disease or things like that, or just something unsavory to put them in a bad light. And then you have it where just on their face, things like adultery, abusive, things like that. So that's where it kind of comes into. So you usually have the 4 factors, and it kind of comes through where there are certain things where they'll just say, okay, on its face, this is defamation, and then it kind of shifts the burden a little bit. So that's where we're at with this. I think what they're mainly claiming is a lot of that complaint is background, and usually when you do file a complaint, you depending on the attorney and stuff like that, you can take swipes at the other party. I've seen it a lot in a lot of the complaints I've read. And it just kind of shows, in essence, bad blood and bad faith. But what it comes down to is this has been filed. It's a state matter. I thought there would be maybe a filing as well for declaratory relief, just to say Paul has no credit and is not a co-author to the Axanar script, because it seems like
he does allege that, yeah.
But I think it's one of those things where this is kind of the path of least resistance and the thing that's most likely to stick, because from the copyright side, why would you have to assert those rights unless the other party tried to bar you from them? Sometimes it's good to be preemptive, but here it didn't really make that much sense. So,
well, I mean, to be fair, though, according to Paul Jenkins' statement, he is apparently trying to bar him from using footage that was shot based on the film being a derivative work of the script that he co-authored with Peters.
And I think that is a little bit of a murky issue. But what I'm saying is, would it be more fiscally sound for Peters to sue on the basis of that and add costs and discovery on top of that, or be reactionary when Jenkins tries to assert those rights? Because I don't know if it has to do with something where he has the footage, or I'm not super versed on that matter there.
But he doesn't, or if he does, it's only a copy.
Okay. But I would say more or less there wouldn't really be, at least in my opinion, the need to spend money prior to Axanar Productions trying to use that footage, because ultimately it would be Paul's position to stop that. But I'm trying to think of the best way to describe this. It's more or less being you could spend money up front, or you could be preemptive on the back end. It just didn't seem like that was the biggest issue. I think it's more or less this was the path of least resistance, if that makes sense.
Can I ask a real quick question, Andrew? When it comes down to a copyright claim, though, does that even have anything to do with the state court? That's a federal issue, is it not?
Yes. So with regard to civil procedure, the way it works is there's a dichotomy of what case it, well, I think what they talk about is usually you have three things that are involved in civil procedure. You have personal jurisdiction, which is the court's power over the party. We kind of saw that a little while back with Robert Meyer Burnett, when I believe Alec tried to sue him in Georgia on common counts for, I guess, unpaid debts. Seeing as Alec was in Georgia, Robert Meyer Burnett was in California, the Georgia court did not have, based on the facts of the case and what Mr. Peters had filed, jurisdiction to make Mr. Burnett appear in Georgia court. So can you get the party to come into court, and can they be held to come into court to answer for the count that's against them? Number two is subject matter jurisdiction, which gets to your point, Sean, where it's the court's power over the claim. And there are certain cases that federal court has original jurisdiction over, which it has to start there, which is, they call it, one is diversity of citizenship. And I'm sorry if I sound a little rusty. I'm an in-house attorney. I do a lot of transactional work. I still, I dabble in litigation if there's like support needed. But what ends up happening is you have, number one is diversity of citizenship, which is the parties are completely diverse. They're from two different states, and the amount in controversy is in excess of $75,000. Or you have what's known as federal question jurisdiction, which is, does the case originate under federal law? So, for instance,
but yeah, sorry to cut you off, only because it's clear that he's not, through this case, seeking any kind of a copyright. He mentions the copyright issue as part of the facts behind explaining Jenkins' actions, but the counts that he actually are alleging are just the violation of the Georgia Code around trade defamation. So
This is
That's
my
what I'm getting at. Because it's a state claim and the parties aren't diverse and there's no federal question, that's why it would have original jurisdiction in Georgia State
Right.
Court.
for
Right.
that. Right. This is my point. This is my point on this: is that if he's going to try to make some kind of claim for copyright, that wouldn't have anything to do with this case anyway.
correct.
Yeah,
he
and
is
it-
challenging a quick piece of information here. Paul Jenkins has registered the copyright for the script with the U.S. Copyright Office. So there is a matter of dispute there that will need to be resolved, and that will happen separately from this, in which he's contesting. He's going to need to contest Paul Jenkins' claim of copyright for the entire thing. Now,
But does he need to, or can he just ignore it?
well, that's the thing, because Paul Jenkins can say, I clearly am the one with the copyright on this. And so if he doesn't, if Alec doesn't contest that, then that makes it, I think, even murkier, because Alec is said on his live stream tonight that he's sort of constrained around claiming copyright on anything Axanar related because of the fan film guidelines as they're incorporated in his settlement with CBS and Paramount for their copyright lawsuit against him from a few years ago. So it's really sort of unclear around whether this script even can be copyrighted. Although it is, I mean, it's registered. So someone would have to dispute it. CBS could, Alec Peters could, because of course the guidelines, the fan film guidelines, have no real legal force. So you can't claim that as a justification, because that's just a statement of guidelines by
No, but
by
the
a
settlement
copyright holder.
does.
Well, the settlement doesn't have legal force outside of the actual parties,
Right.
who are parties to it. So
I guess what I'm getting at is, do we know when Jenkins filed the copyright for the
It
Axanar
was
script?
recently.
Okay, so
You
this
know.
wasn't done maybe in advance because Alex couldn't copyright it. That maybe they had Jenkins do it
No.
as a proxy.
No, I'm pretty sure that that it didn't even cross Alec Peters' mind to copyright this script,
Right.
because that could potentially be seen. Because again, these fan film guidelines do have legal authority on Peters' actions because they're
Right.
incorporated in as part of the settlement.
Well, more importantly, though, I would say that the fan film guidelines themselves are almost irrelevant to this. The fact of the matter is, it's Star Trek's IP. So him filing a copyright on it, Peters filing a copyright, wouldn't be able to be done regardless. It's their IP.
Right. So, but the question though around authorship of literally the words that are part of that screenplay, that's something that the ownership of those words may actually still vest in the people who wrote them.
Right.
And it's like fan art. You can't. Fans can create artworks of IP that's owned by people. You see it all the time, but they can't sell it. They can't distribute it. So, in this case, any Star Trek fan works, CBS couldn't go into your house and take that painting that you made and say it's ours because we own the underlying IP. So copyright only enjoins you from selling or distributing that thing. And so, that leaves us in a position, I think, where Jenkins can claim a copyright over the words that he wrote and contributed. And of course, under copyright law, joint ownership, which is probably what's at the case here between Peters and Jenkins, although Peters is disputing that, but we can talk about that in a second. But under joint ownership, both co-owners are allowed to do with the intellectual property what they will. They can make derivative works. They can license it to other to third parties. The only thing is you have to equally divide any proceeds that come from that licensing or whatever's produced on that. And the only veto that the other co-owner can exercise is around the granting of exclusive license to the intellectual property, and that's, I think, not really an issue here.
Hey, Justin, do me a favor. Could you put, there's two questions. I don't think it's one of them showing up here, but we've got a comment here from Michael K. Stewart, who is a Georgia attorney, down here at the bottom. Could you put that up on screen? Thank you. Sure, it's a derivative work. It may be an unauthorized derivative and therefore infringing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the author of the unauthorized derivative work does not have a copyright in the new portions.
Michael is right, because it more or less is, you can get a copyright in the certain new elements of it, things that are separate and distinctive from the base copyrightable elements.
Right. So, for example, the characters that appear in this that are not canon characters are original creations. So, that's an example. So there is a matter of dispute here between Jenkins and Peters that needs to be resolved around the copyright, because right now the copyright for the Axanar script is legally registered under Paul Jenkins' name.
Andrew, I have a quick question for you. It's probably not quick, probably going to take a little bit for you to answer it here. But what's your analysis here of your conclusion of the claims made against Jenkins and Meta in the complaint, as opposed to what we actually saw? Because this is all based on public information. This is literally all based on that statement. So what's your analysis here, your conclusions thus far of validity of this claim?
I think it's somewhat flimsy because it really didn't go in depth. It mainly just said, at least the way I read the statement, and there hasn't really been any public statement from Paul on this. It was just the statement was released, and they said, we're no longer affiliated with Axanar, and it claimed there were some issues that we had with the production, and we claim to own part of the footage, or have a copyright in the footage. I don't, just in my opinion there, I think they kind of ran with that. I don't know. I think it's very murky, because what they're mainly going to focus on, I think, is that one sentence where they talk about integrity and things like that. But that's more or less just a general statement. It's not saying we think. Yeah,
let's review that, because that really comes. That's core to this. It says Meta Studios, due to conflicts with its core values of transparency, accountability, and integrity, we've removed ourselves from the credits. So it does not actually name Axanar as the center of that statement. It certainly does not name Alec Peters at that. And all it's saying is it's a conflict with our values. It doesn't say that.
It doesn't say what his values are. It's fairly benign based on the statements there. So I think that's going to kind of be an uphill battle there. And the thing that's more or less to me been the issue, because I've tried to follow this a little bit, is obviously Paul made this statement and hasn't said anything publicly, at least to my knowledge, since that statement was put out by Meta. Whereas I believe Alec has made numerous, because I know he does a nightly YouTube stream, or
almost nightly, yeah.
And from what I understand, I think has devoted several minutes of each live stream to, I don't want to say, in essence, speaking unsavory of Mr. Jenkins and dragging him through the mud a little bit.
Yeah, he's made several specific allegations that he said resulted in him firing Paul Jenkins. So he's definitely all week has been ranting about actions that Paul Jenkins took that were unprofessional and led to his being fired.
Mhm.
Even at one time said he's going to release the email, which he never did.
Yeah. So just for the folks at home, there was an email that Paul Jenkins sent Alec Peters that we don't know the contents of, other than it was apparently explaining his reasons why he was leaving, and there was some anger behind the way that was expressed. And Peters has made a big deal about this email and how unprofessional it was and how it used naughty language and all this sort of stuff, but he won't release it. So we don't know really what that email says, whether it contributes to his cause or his claims of defamation or not. He's just saying what he believes it says. And, in court, you're going to have to actually produce it.
Mhm.
All right.
So the big question here is, does Alec Peters expect this to really go anywhere? We know that he has tried this sort of thing before with Jason DeBoard back in about 10 years ago in California, claiming that Jason DeBoard, a blog author who writes about props, had written about Alec Peters, and Alec claimed that it was defamatory. That was dismissed by a judge who also ordered damages, which Alec Peters has to date never paid. So there's that. He tried it again with the Tiana Peters. I'm sorry, not Tiana Peters.
Oh no,
Tiana Armstrong.
No,
Sorry about that,
no,
Tiana.
no.
Tiana Armstrong case, which was a dispute over prop sale of Enterprise E model, and that was settled recently out of court. So we don't know exactly how that turned out, but
Also, I should point out with that too that that DeBoard settlement, the judgment actually, Tiana bought that. She owned that. So we really don't know if that has not been fulfilled at this point because we don't know the terms of that settlement with Tiana Armstrong.
Oh, that's true. It's possible that one of the terms of that settlement was the completion of the payment of Jason DeBoard's damages. But again, that's not something we're going to be able to know.
We're not privy to it, right?
Yeah, we're not
Mark
privy to it.
Kane says hello.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for joining us.
It's an awful lot like Jonathan Swan.
Yeah, I've been spamming invites while we've been talking here.
So, I'm curious what you all think about how this legal complaint, does it sound like it really holds any water? If you were a jury listening to this, even just hearing this one side of it, does it sound compelling to you? It is, by the way, he asked for a jury trial on this in Georgia. So, opinions, what do you guys think?
Well, it starts off bad by saying by not getting the fact that his defamation is what he's really trying to sue for, and then he lists what libel. No, he lists the other thing. I'm forgetting now. But if you can't even get the basic information of your case across to the jury and the judge, you're not going to go very far.
Yeah, I want to point that out too, because this pleading, much like his Burnett pleading, is riddled with typographical errors, which seems very odd, especially and also too, I pointed this out too. The font is all wrong for a pleading. It looks like it's in Helvetica, which is what his pleading against Rob was. Andrew, do you ever see Helvetica used in a court pleading?
I do not. And might I just say, with a lot of the pleadings that have come through like that, my former boss who I worked for was a big law attorney for about 10 years before he transitioned into in-house. And working for him, if I had pulled crap like that, I would have been thrown through a plate glass window. Like,
right. Exactly.
Just,
Yeah, I mean, when I was a paralegal, Times New Roman was the standard. Courier was used on for depositions. You know, this was just a standard. I've never seen anyone use Helvetica until I've seen Alec's last two his last two lawsuits against Robert Marbinet and now Paul Jenkins. And again, to point out again the typographic errors, which are very suspect. A paralegal again, it's like deja vu all over again. A paralegal did not go through this and read this, and then an attorney signed off on this being this poorly written. And as something that we were discussing earlier, this very much seems like these are the words of Alec Peters. This does not sound like the words of his attorney, and this is what's perplexing about this, because this isn't a well-known attorney, a pretty esteemed attorney out here. Is that, as far as I understand, that's correct, right, Carlos?
Yeah, he's actually won some awards. He does more patent work than copyright work, and I don't think really much in the way of defamation. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but yeah, he's an IP attorney.
He's not a tort attorney. That is what it comes down to.
So yeah, I mean, that's what this is. This is a tort case. This is not an IP case.
Right. And so this is why I find this again, this is very suspect once again.
And just to add to the point where if you're doing IP, that usually arises under United States law. So maybe this person is used to practicing in federal court and they're now having to change it up and go through state.
Well, federal court usually isn't. I mean, usually isn't very big on typos either. But the case itself seems very odd. I mean, again, this seems like Alec is just being a bully again, because he wasn't even specifically addressed in this in the state. In fact, basically all it said is that it's so subjective. They don't live up to our standards. Well, we don't know what native standards are. What could that mean? I mean, how that's defamatory seems very. I mean, there's not enough there.
Hey, Sean, quick question. Yeah. Hasn't Alec claimed that Alec Peters and Axanar and Aries Studios is all separate entities along?
Yeah, he has all along. In fact,
but that's not an issue in this case yet.
Right.
And the reason is, well, I don't know the reason why, but it's important to note, and Andrew, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but the plaintiff in this legal complaint is only Alec Peters. It is not the Axanar production. It is not Aries Studios. Or anything. It is just Alec Peters. Given that this is a trade defamation dispute, is that significant?
I would say yes, because obviously the proper, well, at least in my opinion, I would think it would need to be both, because based on that statement, you are going after more or less what they're saying is our values don't agree with, and correct me if I'm wrong, Carlos.
They're in conflict, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Alec Peters and Axanar Productions.
Well, actually, it does not. It does not actually. It names Alec Peters as the leader of this Star Trek fan film, but the actual allegations around transparency, accountability, and integrity just says that because of conflicts around these issues, we've removed ourselves. It doesn't specifically name Peters as being the source of those three issues. It doesn't specifically name the production company as the source of those three issues. It just says that those issues arose, they conflict, so we're leaving. So I'm not sure that's defamation.
Right. And what's more to this, here's my question. As Alec Peters himself, the individual, and not Axanar Productions, does he even have standing to make this case, to make this claim?
I think it just might be more or less a clerical error. They could add it at the end, because usually this is kind of a pleading.
That they could add Axanar as a plaintiff.
They could, yeah. add them as a party after the fact. I think this was one of those things where, at least in my opinion, it kind of seemed rushed to the presses.
Mhm.
So I wouldn't be surprised if they add Axanar Productions as a plaintiff.
So, but then that goes to our observations that, again, this was a hastily written legal complaint with, rife with all kinds of errors, and that doesn't even get the plaintiffs right. So yes, he can fix it, but it does show a lot of a real lack of professionalism around the formatting, writing, spelling, etc. in a legal complaint.
And Glenn says, good sign it wasn't well thought out. Filing within a week after the Meta Studio statement.
Well, here's a question. The other comment right after that, though, too. Look at Mark's comment. That's the one.
Mark is correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Truth is a defense to defamation.
Yeah. And see, here's an interesting thing that raises is if you're alleging that you have been slandered or defamed around these three issues, then it seems to me like you're opening the door in discovery for the defendant, Paul Jenkins, to actually look for those instances and bring them to light. So if there are instances where he can show that Peters promised transparency, didn't provide it, that displays, that proves that, the accountability. Again, if Peters is the only one who controlled the finances of it and said that he would be sharing that with Jenkins as director, so that Jenkins knew, what kind of resources he had available to work with, then that, is a factual thing that can be demonstrated as well. And as far as integrity, all he has to do is hold up two emails, one where he says he would do one thing, and another one where he says, I'm not going to do that, and you have your integrity right there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, precisely. There you go.
I think the big issue right now is, obviously, we're not privy to what went on behind the curtain here.
Right.
But I will say, obviously, following this, obviously, Paul is going to have to answer or talk to counsel, and he and Meta are going to have to decide how they want to respond, if they want to just file an answer or if they want to file a motion based on certain factors. But I would say more or less what would happen is I would think you would build the basis to say, all right, what was your rationale because of this? And do you have supporting documentation? And then obviously, if it went to a jury trial, then they would be the ultimate finders of fact there.
In his live stream tonight, Peters talked about how invasive discovery is and how he was going to enjoy being able to dive deep into Paul Jenkins' documents, emails, etc., as a result of this. And that's true to a certain extent, but what he forgets is the same goes for him.
Yep.
Well, there's also the issue of relevance as well.
Exactly.
I think there was a live stream where he was talking about Robert Meyer Burnett, and he was saying, I want to know everything about what every employer has said to you or when you've owed money or stuff like that. And I think that's just getting to character and things that are outside the scope of what the case says or really pertains to. I mean, I would say with this, it really is, or sorry, was I interrupting someone? I apologize.
Well, my big question is, doesn't that kind of show that there is an intentional malice on Peters' part? Like, isn't that documentable evidence that Peters is doing this stuff out of malice?
What's he's notorious because of his litigious nature. So, what do you call that? The type of California's term for a vexus litigant.
A vexatious litigant. Usually you see it.
Mark says, much like CBS All Access, Discovery goes both ways.
Yeah, I think the problem here is, well, first of all, son, you're exactly correct. The legal definition of malice around defamation is that you knew or should have known that this was false. I think that is going to be really difficult to prove by Peters about what Jenkins said, because the only thing he said was it conflicts with our values, and he knows what his values are, therefore it's true. Whereas on Peters' side, there is likely documentation of him promising things and not delivering. And, I'm pretty sure Paul has kept all those emails. And the fact that Peters knows about those and this was pointed out to him means he should have known that these statements he's making are false. So malice is much easier to prove in the reverse if he counterclaims. But the bigger picture here, I think, is looking at Peters' past litigious patterns, because he's rarely won any of his cases. You only have to look at legal filings he's made over decades, and which I did once in Georgia, because he lived in Georgia for quite a while before California. And the county clerk that I contacted was going through all the different cases he's filed over the years, and she was like, "Wow!" when she saw the number of them that there were. So it's really clear Peters knows that lawsuits cost money, and defending yourself against a lawsuit costs money. I don't think he intends this ever to go to court. I don't think he intends this ever to go to a jury. He intends to make life as difficult as possible for Paul Jenkins. And that is a legitimate concern, I think, that Paul Jenkins could have. And that it moves ultimately to some kind of settlement, which will keep everything secret. And so word won't be able to get out about really, the nefarious things Peters may have actually done, or Jenkins may have actually done, according to Peters. Those things will be kept silent. And in the meantime, a lot of money will have been spent, and for no real actual gain, other than Peters being able to drag Jenkins' name through the mud for, however many months this goes on for. But I know from having interviewed past targets of Peters' litigation that his litigious nature and the amount of money it costs to defend against him is expensive. Robert Meyer Burnett is still paying off tens of thousands of dollars in legal bills in a lawsuit that was probably frivolous if it had ever gone before a judge, if it had gotten that far. And that still costs him tens of thousands of dollars. So,
hey, Carlos, Mark is wanting to know: would this make this lawsuit a nuisance suit?
Well, again, you have to go to court to prove that. So it costs you money to be able to claim that it's a nuisance suit. So that's where he kind of has him, by the balls. Kind of is like, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. Either way, it's going to cost.
This is kind of like that energy magnet that sues everybody who says anything bad about him, even when it's like provable.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to point out that the board case wound up being dismissed, and ultimately damages were paid to Jason because it was a SLAPP case. Now, again, we've discussed SLAPP before. A SLAPP lawsuit SLAPP stands for Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation, and it's meant to stop exactly what Peters has history of doing, and that is suing people because he doesn't like their opinion, because the cost of litigation will be so high to the defendant that they will simply acquiesce to the demands of the plaintiff. The problem I see here in Georgia is that the only way, and I could be wrong in my understanding of this, but the anti-SLAPP statute in Georgia only pertains to statements made regarding the public interest. So, in other words, and this is just basically what I looked up here. I've looked this up before too. make a statement about public policy or a public official or something, and you get sued because of that statement, then their SLAPP laws apply. But it doesn't seem to apply to private entities, private individuals, and private entities. So I don't think, just based on my reading of this, Michael K. Stewart may be able to provide some more insight to this later on. But I don't think that the SLAPP laws would apply to this. But I would have to imagine something.
You're correct. The Digital Media Project notes that if someone sues you in Georgia for making statements on a website or blog about a topic or issue of ordinary public interest that is not under government consideration or review, and you are not calling for such consideration or review, then you're not entitled to bring an anti-SLAPP motion to dismiss the case under the law. So so you're absolutely correct.
I think that's important to know, because I think people are under the misconception that when they think of SLAPP, they assume there's federal laws against SLAPP. That's a law of the land. It's not. It's state by state.
Yes.
So
California, by contrast, has a very much more liberal anti-SLAPP law that does cover disputes between private individuals and companies and individuals, not government. So that's why Jason DeBoard was able to get his judgment and have the case that Alec Peters brought against him dismissed.
Well, and it also serves as to why to this day we still have not seen. I think part of that is why to this day we still have not seen a lawsuit filed against Robert Meyer Burnett in the district, in his actual jurisdiction in California.
He said as recently as this week, though, that he is planning on doing that since he settled with Tiana Armstrong.
He said that for a year and a half. So I mean, it's okay. So we shall see. But again, I would have to imagine that Georgia must have some kind of protection for that goes beyond the scope of SLAPP laws for such a thing. Like I said, I'd love to get Michael K. Stewart's insight into this. I'm sure he would know if he's still watching, but maybe another time.
The question you're asking is, are there other legal means in Georgia to be able to get this lawsuit dismissed?
Sure.
Whether it's frivolous or, it could be frivolous. If it meets the standards of being frivolous, and I don't know off the top of my head what those standards in Georgia are, but I know that they have them. So that would be one way to go in responding to this case.
Well, it is likely that they could just demur or have a motion to dismiss, but obviously that's going to be based on what Paul and Meta and their counsel decide to do.
Now, Andrew, let's talk a little bit about what options Paul Jenkins has at this point. Now, again, given what we know about Peter's pattern of trying to intimidate people through the costs of litigation, the fact that Peters is also suing Meta, it's very likely, and again, I don't know if this is the case, but if it's an actual business, it very well may have an insurance policy that would cover something like this, right?
Correct. Usually with most businesses, and I obviously don't know what the case would be with Meta Studios, you can have a variety of policies. You could have a D&O policy, fiduciary, errors and omissions. And usually what would happen is, and when a lot of times companies get sued, you tender the claim to insurance, choose counsel, and you go from there. And sometimes it's covered by the policy, sometimes it's not. But that's going to be just generally based on what coverage, if any, Meta has. I would assume.
But it would, in this industry, I know I have a production company, we have that kind of insurance, and we're a tiny little company. And myself personally, because I write journalistically and independently, I have an insurance writer on my personal insurance that would cover me if any defamation claims were made against me. which Peters tried to do several months ago, and that fizzled quickly, thanks to my lawyer. But point being that if in fact he does have this kind of insurance, money out of pocket that Jenkins might have to produce to respond to this wouldn't necessarily be very high, right?
It would depend on a host of factors, because they could say, well, ultimately, the statement was made by Meta, was it not? It wasn't made specifically by Paul Jenkins. Right. So the notion could be, there's some kind of wheeling and dealing you have to do. More or less what would happen is, if they did have the coverage, you would tender the claim, and then you would get an adjuster assigned, and they would review your policy, say what coverage you had, and you would kind of go from there. And at that point, if you did have coverage, they would select counsel, and counsel would decide how to proceed at that point. But usually what you have based on cost is a retention amount. So usually they might say, all right, we're willing to defend you, but you're going to pay the first $25,000 of the attorney's fees and costs. And there could, well, it's not really relevant in this one, but if there's a case that has a certain number of claims in it, where if it said, we're suing Jenkins for defamation and copyright infringement, and the policy didn't cover copyright infringement, and they would say, all right, we're going to reduce your costs based upon these factors. And there's various formulas they use and things like that to come to it there.
Good to know. Good to know.
So that's how it would work. But as I said, I don't know if Meta has one of these policies. That's obviously something that they're going to need to obviously work out and figure out in how they want to proceed.
Okay.
And Lynn wants to know, would it be worth fighting it, take the transparency and accountability and integrity to task?
Well, I mean, since those three issues are at the heart of what Peters is claiming Jenkins is lying about, then yes, any evidence that would show that is evidence that you would want to find in discovery.
And just to the point here.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, in terms of the other thing to consider, and I touched early on in the fourth factor, what are the damages here?
Right.
From what we know, this is, in terms of Axanar Productions, this is a fan film. This is not a money-making enterprise. In essence, even if you go through the entirety of this process, what ultimately, obviously they're going to claim things, my reputation's been drugged through, people don't want to work with me, things like that. But at the end of the day, from what I understand, Axanar Productions is solely incorporated or has been put up just to make Axanar. And then when that's done, it's going to be dissolved. So if you have that notion in terms of not being a money-making enterprise, ultimately, what's the fiscal?
Well, what he does say in the complaint, though, is that Jenkins' statement will interfere in I think the term he uses is the solicitations that Axanar makes to fund the fan production. And of course, we know what that means. That's the crowdfunding that he manages to goad out of gullible Star Trek fans. So that's what he's claiming is being injured.
Okay, but ultimately, at the end of the day, how could that? I think that would be a hard thing to quantify, because
would it though? Like if you know it's going to cost how much it's going to cost to make it, and you know how much money you have on hand, and you know how much money you have to raise, and we do know all these things, then his interference in the continued fundraising to complete the film, I think you can quantify the damages right there.
Well,
but it's fairly nebulous, because from what I understand, there's no line item budget, and there hasn't been one for quite some time.
Oh, there might be. You'd be surprised.
Okay.
I mean, he has in public statements very recently talked about the additional, I think it's 60,000 that he needs, and how much of it is apportioned to editing, how much to visual effects, how much to other post-production like sound and so forth. So it's detailed at least to that level.
With all the money this town has made in donations, he could have made this feature about 20 times over by now.
Sure, of course. I mean, the big lie here. I don't know if it's a lie. The big issue here is that why it's so difficult for him to produce this film. We have his colleague and chief apologist Jonathan Lane, who's produced a 12-minute film, which is half the length of the Axanar films. He did it for under $25,000 on time. It is almost ready. It's in post-production now. So clearly it's possible to produce something like this. In fact, Peters showed a scene from it tonight, and it looks comparable to what you'd expect to see in the Axanar short films. So the real question, that you raised, Justin, is an apt one, which is, why is it so, goddamn hard to make this film? Because you're spending all your time suing people.
And then he also turns around and he's claiming this is causing him financial harm. Well, Paul Jenkins is a show where he's made more than enough money to make this with no accident.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is the thing, is that I find this claim of being able to fundraise further a question because of Paul's public statement. Well, here's the reality of this. Axanar is not allowed public fundraising. So the fundraising that they've been depending on has been, it's a very narrow scope to begin with. So Paul putting them on blast and saying that they didn't rise to our standards really doesn't mean anything to anyone outside that inner circle.
But wouldn't also, Mark Haynes calls us out in the chat, doesn't Alec have to prove that
this is
the statements
yes
were the cause of the shortfall? Like he has to actually show the harm.
Exactly. This is my point entirely.
And if you look at the complaint, paragraph
Jason, can you, I'm sorry, Justin, can you put that comment back up while Jason?
Mark Haynes' comment, please. Yes.
Yeah. If you look at the complaint, paragraph 54 says, as of August 10th, 2020, the Jenkins public statement has received 25 likes and 10 comments, demonstrating the distribution of the statement to multiple individuals other than Mr. Peters. So, I mean, even there, like, okay, 25 people liked it. Like, that's, and the 25 people that liked it are probably all people who Jenkins could prove weren't going to contribute anyway. Because I was one of the 25.
I was one of them too.
So was I.
Well, I was not, and I think what's more relevant, though, and the reason he brings this up, that Peters brings this up, he's trying to show that in fact it was published and seen by the public, and he can probably
it's published to a third party.
Yeah,
because that is one of the factors.
So he's just using those numbers to show that third parties read it. So that's all that really means.
So bottom line, Andrew, how do you speculate? Where do you think this is going?
If I had to fathom a guess, obviously Paul's going to have to answer. Right. I would assume that just based on the benign nature of the statement, the next step would be filing a motion to dismiss.
That's what I thought too.
And Peters would answer. And then the judge would make a ruling on that. And the case would either be dismissed or it would go ahead, at which time Jenkins and Meta would file an answer. They'd have an initial conference. Discovery would begin. Discovery would be propounded by both parties. Depositions would be set up and would go on for a while. And probably, I would guess, both sides would, depending on what was found, cross motion for summary judgment sometime down the road. It just depends on, with COVID and things like that, the courts are moving kind of slow. So in terms of when there could be hearings on various things, it's going to take a while because both state and federal are pretty backed up right now.
I would like to make a prediction that no matter what happens in this, by the end of it, Axanar will still not have been made.
Well, it's entirely possible. I mean, there's enough, if Paul, I'd love to get your opinion on this too, Andrew, about if Paul Jenkins did a counterclaim that did allege that as the copyright holder, he can't, Peters can't proceed. And even if he ends up losing that, could he still potentially delay Axanar's production as a result?
I think it's possible. As I talked about earlier, you could have declaratory relief. But what it is with this is that's kind of this factor that's in the air. And it's more or less going to be the notion of who's going to shoot first.
Mm-hmm.
Because right now, you could sue and get asked for declaratory relief from the judge to say, if it was Peters, put in and say, Mr. Jenkins isn't a co-author, he's not a producer, he's not an editor, and therefore he does not have any copyright holding to the copyright of the script as a joint author or otherwise, and just try to knock that issue out. But as I said, I think it's kind of hanging in the air right now. And there really, at least in my opinion, isn't a point to move on it until either A, the movie is produced using that footage and it's going to be released, or Meta Studios wants to do something with the footage. So it's mainly just hanging in the air right now. And it's kind of like a standoff situation. You know, who's going to go for their gun first?
Mm-hmm.
What about? I would also suggest that
We already know that Han shot first, and Greedo didn't get back up.
Fantastic.
Until
yes, the son's right. It's Han and Greedo in the Mos Eisley Cantina.
Yeah,
who's going to pull the trigger on the blaster first?
I would also point out that I believe that Paul has a much more significant counterclaim for defamation based on the 6 days of nonstop attacks from Alec Peters on social media, including
And his surrogates.
and
Don't
YouTube,
forget.
and his surrogates as well. Exactly.
Yeah,
So-
as I touched on earlier, because ultimately the only thing we have from Paul is that one statement.
Right.
Whereas from what I've been told, Peters usually does like an hour and change live stream multiple times a week. And from what I understand, he's devoted significant time in
yeah.
each one to more or less speak ill of Paul.
That's correct.
Claiming that he was deficient in what he was supposed to do.
Inappropriate. My favorite. He was inappropriate on the set.
Mm-hmm. And to that point, it does go to the elements of defamation, because I believe, wasn't it with Tiana Armstrong's case where there was the issue about the sale of the Enterprise Z and whether Peters was owed a commission,
Right.
and then ultimately what he did was posted on Facebook calling Tiana all of this names and
Yep.
Yes,
speak
that's
ill of her company.
that's correct.
And just based on that was actionable to move forward to counterclaim for defamation.
Yeah.
And
which
correct.
he did.
from my understanding, survived any dismissal or thing of the like, and was actually running concurrent
Yeah.
with Peters' claim up through the case, from which I heard settled a couple weeks ago.
Right. Her initial claim was for declaratory relief, period. That was her
Yeah.
initial
And,
claim. It didn't get into, there was no monetary damages sought until Peters could not shut up on Facebook. And that's when they got.
Speaking of Alec not shutting up on Facebook, Mark says he's missing at least 4 times this week, including tonight.
But he can't
Yes,
discuss.
this is a famous Alec Peters tactic in which he says, Paul's a terrible person, but I can't really talk about it because my lawyers told me not to. But I'd also like you to know that Paul is a terrible person, and here are all the reasons why. And
Exactly.
he does that all the time. He published one statement originally right after I think the day of or the day after Paul Jenkins' statement, and then withdrew it. Because it was, very possibly defamatory. And then, on advice of counsel. And yet every day this week that he's done a live stream, he's done the same thing. I can't talk about it, but I'm going to talk about it.
Well, look at the way he acted during the CBS lawsuit. I mean, he wasn't supposed to talk about it then, and then he would be ranting just about every other day.
He actually said this week that he learned his lesson from the CBS lawsuit and was listening to his lawyer and wasn't going to say anything, and then went on to say something.
Bullshit.
I will say
He said that. He actually said that.
not to go one way or the other, but I feel that one point in that, and I will say, just coming from the point, usually if you are involved in litigation, the first thing you do as a lawyer, you get your client to shut up, because obviously anything that can be said out there can be used against you, and they can take those comments and they can run with them. But the one that always kind of got me was, I believe it was because I used to read Fan Film Factor from time to time, and I believe there was an interview with Alec where he said, "Oh, I've learned my lesson. I get heated at times, but I've learned to kind of control what I say and things like that." And I think it had something to do with Christian Gossett. And then in the same article, he started trading barbs with people in the comments in an article where it says, I learned to shut up and when it comes to litigation. So I would honestly, I think the biggest thing there is just, if you do have this and you are involved in litigation, just don't say anything publicly. Just say, this is what I've done. We're moving through the process. We hope for a speedy.
Well, that's if you're actually serious about winning a case. I don't think that's what's at play here. I think he's literally just trying to intimidate Paul Jenkins and to make Paul Jenkins spend money defending himself, and that eventually he'll give up and settle. And then everything goes secret. That's what he's done before. That's what he's doing here too.
He's trying to hurt Paul. To hurt Paul, his company, and his family. I have no question about that whatsoever. That's exactly what this is about. The statement by Maida was so benign, he could have simply had it there and ignored it. This reminds me of the first interaction I ever had with Alec Peters. This goes back to 2015, where a random Reddit thread, that no one knew about but him, he decides to make a big deal about it in his 80,000 strong, or whatever it was, Axanar fan group, and it's going on, and the whole purpose of that was to get high fives from everyone about what a great producer he is, how he's doing everything above board. And the fact of the matter is that all he did by doing that was bring attention to that Reddit article and the very serious questions that were Reddit posts, that is, and the very serious questions that were being raised about moving the goalposts, about accountability, about where's the money going, about why hasn't this been released, all these questions that were being raised on Reddit that nobody was asking before that point.
We call this the Streisand effect.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so the truth of the matter is this statement could have come and gone. We would have, of course, made a note of it on Axamonitor and let it go. And had Alec simply kept his mouth shut about it and just moved on and acted like business as usual, there wouldn't be any complications here. But the other side of the coin is about this too, is that it's now because someone has dared question him. Now it's as if he feels he must retaliate and go nuclear on them. And go nuclear against them, their company, their livelihood, their family. And this is, again, back to the point of why when he threatened to sue me on my kid's birthday in 2016, why I just flipped, the switch flipped with me, because you threatened to sue me, you're going after my family. It's that simple. And I'm sure Paul's feeling the exact same way right now.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I mean, he threatened me, and I laughed at him. I'm like, okay, go ahead, you'll get pocket lint, but that's about all I'm worth.
And the truth is that when Alec likes to go after what he views as low-hanging fruit, Mike Bodden has said this before about why he went after Robert Meyer Burnett, and why he ultimately. He had a choice of people to sue, and that's why he picked Robert Meyer Burnett. And right now he looks at Paul as low-hanging fruit, and it's rather despicable. But there you have it. So I mean, as I think we've talked about this now for almost an hour and a half here. So I'm curious. Two things. Does anybody else in the chat have any questions for Andrew? Hello?
I just want this to be over.
Oh, don't worry about that.
It's just getting started. The crazy train is pulling out of the station.
So, Andrew, I want to thank you for joining us. Do you have any closing statements you'd like to make about this that you want that people to understand, or anything?
No, I think we've kind of talked around it. I think we have seen stuff like this in the past. So more or less what I stated earlier is how I think it's going to proceed. Opinion-wise, I don't think this ever gets in front of a jury. But I don't know. Ultimately, time will tell how long this goes on for. But I think with things being backed up and the various factors here, it's probably here to stay for a little while. It's just going to
30 more years.
Obviously what Paul and Meta decide to do, how they hope to handle this, and take it from there.
Yeah, just by for sake of comparison, the Tiana Armstrong case went a year and a half before it was settled. So, if you want a sort of comparable time frame.
So for everyone out there watching, and I think we're kind of all in agreement that what we're going to do when we split the show up tonight between our main show, our lower deck show, we're going to split this segment up too, so that people can watch the dedicated Axanar portion of the show as well. Sound about right, Justin?
Yeah, I'll put it in time codes in the description. That'll be about the easiest way, so everybody will know exactly what time each segment starts.
Okay. Well, okay. We'll talk more about it later then. So, Andrew, I think we're about done, bud.
Right.
So, we really appreciate your insight into this. Thank you so much for.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. Much appreciated.
Thank you for having me on. It was great talking with y'all.
We look forward to having
at last second too.
Yeah, and also, buddy, I want to get you on another time. We'll get you on to talk about more legal stuff. Of course, we'll have you talk about the cool stuff too. The fun geek stuff that we always like to talk about. Okay, bud?
All right. I look forward to it, y'all. Y'all have a great night.
Yeah.
And
all right.
Glenn Hines says the hero prop settled.
What was that?
Glenn wants to know if hero prop settled.
Yes, they settled.
Yeah, you can put that up on the screen.
Yeah. Hero prop is Tiana Armstrong. Yes, they settled a couple of weeks ago.
Yep.
And we don't know the terms of those settlements. Usually you don't. Peter's public pronouncements around it, he makes it out that he made money on the deal. We don't know. But with it settled, he says he now has the resources to now sue somebody else. So this week it is Paul Jenkins. Next week it could be Robert Meyer Burnett again, but in California. We'll see.
You know, if I ended a lawsuit and had resources, I'd make my damn fan film.
Yeah, I wonder why he's getting money from to do this. I mean,
stop with that crazy talk, Jason. Jesus,
crazy talk.
You gotta wonder how he's going to be paying.
Justin, I can barely understand you.
Here's a good legal question. Has there ever been a settlement in a lawsuit where the settlement was specifically made public?
Occasionally, usually in matters of big public interest, some environmental cases, for example, some of the terms of the settlement are made public, and that's part of the terms of the settlement. So yeah, it happens sometimes. Rarely the whole thing, but occasionally, parts of it. Especially if money's involved, they'll say how much it was, but not. But still stipulate that this is not an admission of guilt.
You've got to wonder where Alec is getting all the money to do all these lawsuits. Whenever he doesn't have any other income that we know of than the fan film.
We should avoid speculation.
I agree.
That's a good point. What he does say, however, in tonight's live stream is that this is not costing donors anything. He says he's funding this legal effort on his own, whatever that means. So,
okay.
The only thing I will say is just make the damn film.
Yeah, that's really the issue. Is just I don't understand why he just doesn't make the movie.
You just make the film.
I mean, here's the bigger question. If he was fronting the money for this lawsuit himself, why not use that fund to finish the film?
Well,
he says that he is selling his house, that they actually had an offer they accepted, and he's going to use some of the proceeds from the house sale to help finish Axanar. So we'll see. TBD. Last note, not about the case, but about Axanar, is along with the news of the lawsuit, Alec Peters also announced a new director who would be the fourth director of Axanar. His name is Ted Brunetti. He is an acting coach who's worked with, some pretty big names as an acting coach. And that's really, Peters has limited the scope of work for this person quite a bit. He literally only wants him to direct actors and work with actors and have no say so creatively about the project. Although he offered to let him sit in on editing sessions if he wants, but really he just wants someone to work with the actors as they complete the last two shoots of Axanar that are supposed to come up. We don't know when. He's saying maybe. What's that?
He wants a babysitter for the actors.
In a way, and he really is downplaying the importance of this role, and he does it by saying, well, in television, directors aren't very important. I think television directors would take issue with that, but he does have a point in contrasting it with films, feature films, where directors are considered the author of the work. That's not true in television. And what he's always played with in a gray area is whether Axanar is a feature film and is run the way a feature film is run, where directors do have creative control, or whether it's more like a television series. So this week, because of Paul Jenkins' statement and his attempt to minimize Paul Jenkins' contributions and role and so forth, he's insisting that it's like a TV series. He's the showrunner. He's the creative voice. The director just tells the actors what to do.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that it sounds like something I heard on a podcast this week, like past couple of weeks, coming from people who are involved in television and movies, saying what they were talking about, defining the differences between what a director does on television versus what a director does on film. So I think that this is probably, I think he might be a Scrubs fan. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, again, it speaks to a pattern of behavior we've seen before in the way he talks about the other directors of Axanar, all of whom have left under circumstances where they've pointed to deficiencies in his management of the project. Where he's made claims that Christian Gossett in Prelude to Axanar never did any of the editing, and also didn't deliver other things he said he was going to deliver. Makes exactly the same claims about Robert Meyer Burnett, and says the same things about Paul Jenkins. And you have to start to wonder, after three directors who disappoint you in exactly the same way, why you keep hiring people who disappoint you in exactly the same way.
I've said repeatedly that at some, either we are to believe one of two things: either that Alec Peters has the absolute worst judgment when it comes to hiring directors, or he's completely full of shit. There is no in between on this. Okay, and I would also like to point out that there is a specific reason why he's compartmentalizing his new director to only direct the actors. And that goes to, and by doing this, I don't think he's realized this, but he's basically acknowledged exactly what Maida has suggested, exactly what Robert Meyer Burnett suggested, exactly what Christian Gossett suggested, the issue of transparency. If he has a director, if he's only allowing this director to direct, and he has somebody else doing the editing, he's the overall showrunner, he's producing, he doesn't have to answer to anything, is what it comes down to. That's the bottom line on this, on why he is creating such a narrow scope for this new director. So, and it goes to exactly what the statement by Maida on behalf of Paul stated.
Yeah, it'll definitely be something that Meta can demonstrate.
Mark did call something out, though. TV directors are responsible for getting the show done, no matter what, though. And that's something that's been brought up on another podcast I've been listening to, Office Ladies, that realistically, like, they are the boss that week. That they're there. That they're the ones who are building the schedules and all other stuff. So the idea that you're going to bring in somebody just to coach actors is kind of laughable.
It's a spurious claim, and in TV, yes, the director of each episode is responsible for delivering the episode. So they're responsible for scheduling, and then ultimately the editing, delivering an edit, making revisions based on notes from producers and from a network. So there's still definite creative control that is handed over to the director, delegated to the director. Certainly not to the extent of a feature film, but it's still substantive.
I would like to take issue with this because, in Alec's defense, and he has pointed this out himself, that he did actually spend some time on the Battlestar Galactica set, so he knows entirely how a television production is run. He knows it from top to bottom because he was there, and he also, from what I heard, this may not be true. From what I heard, he stayed at a Holiday Inn Express once as well.
Hey, listen. I've sat on the in my life. I've been in color guard before a NBA Orlando Magic game. I would
pay cash money to see that, Jason.
I sat courtside in an Orlando Magic game, and I've sat in the cheap seats. I'm not fucking Shaquille O'Neal.
Exactly. You don't learn by watching. You learn by doing. And so,
Holiday Inn Express. I'm telling you, that's all he needs. He's got it covered.
I
have a question.
Don't make me a doctor.
Go ahead.
Are we done grinding the bones of this dead horse?
Yes, we are. We're at 129 and 45 seconds right now.
If only it was a truly dead horse. But yes, I think we're ready to move on.
Yes, I agreed.
So Justin, you suggested we take a short break.
Yeah,
since we've been going for an hour and a half straight.
Yeah,
and then we'll come back. with the rest of the show.